extremely happy to be here. And yes, I've been involved quite a lot of years now with architecture photography, and it's been a wonderful task. Is that good? Yes. Today I will go through this experience, and I decided somehow to use the structure of the book because I think it allows me to just to explain what are the issue, what are the problem, what are the wonderful aspect, why do I have this fascination about try to talk about space. And so I'm taking the structure of the book, which has been somehow a tough selection of 20 years of work. I decided not to focus on individual architects, because this is already in many books, but to reorganize the work with a very simple topic. So we have memory, we have light and shadows, of course, we have materiality, and we have the ground. And together with this subject, I had to bring together architects that maybe have some relation or no relation. So it was quite of a difficult task to graphically make sure the work would stand together. I will start with this first chapter, which is entitled Memory. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what is it for me to photograph architecture, to photograph space. I'm not in a position to really make a lecture about perceiving space, but I just wanted to point it again at some of the big issue that we have when we are visiting a space, and what can I do with my camera? What is the experience that a camera, a very, very simple tool, can do? And there is a sentence that a little quote from John Hejduk that I always like to mention, which is when we visit a building, compared to all the other experience of art, we are digested by the building. So we have a completely body experience of the space, and the space is going to transform us. What do I want to say by that? That it is an experience where all our senses are working together. We can maybe know the building already, have a memory, have an intellectual knowledge of the plan. We remember the room we've seen before. We can smell, we are cold, we hear the noise. In relation to this very simple, very complex, what can I do with my camera? And this is the main dilemma. So I don't want to represent architecture. I don't want to compete with this complex experience. It is not the space, it is a photograph. And that's why I more and more come to look at the space with very simple intervention. I leave away the wide angle, the big perspective, to try to reorganize the space in a very conventional way. I move away from the color. I go back to a very reduced message. There's a nice quotation from Paul Claudel, the French poet, saying, "Photograph is to transform that which is flowing and transient into a portable square." So we have the big flux of life. We have all things changing all the time in front of us, and the camera just has to say yes. It has to stop that moment. It has to create a frame. This is our main tool. This very simple 4 lines are creating a new story. And this is also our strength. We have a frame. By framing, by isolating, by creating a new condition, we rename the reality, we rename that moment, and we displace it. We can bring it to this wall, we can bring it to a book, which is a very beautiful form to, again, express the complexity of space, or we can bring it to a table or to a gallery. And this is what we can do. And again, why do I use black and white? There's another quotation, is that Aristotle said, we perceive sounds better at night. Somehow, by telling you very few stories, I hope I can bring you one essential story about the building. So here we start with 2 photographs that I've done. I think the first photograph of a building I've done. And sometimes I look at them and I say, well, maybe they're the best. The camera was broken, it was not my equipment. I was struggling a lot, and I didn't know much about architecture. I didn't know anything about John Hejduk. This is the housing that he done for the IBA project in late 80s in Berlin. And the camera was, for me, not a way of representing, like I say, but it was a way of understanding. You're young, when you photograph, you always have reference, you think about what else you have seen, but when you're confronted with his work, there's no reference. You have to only to react to what we see. It was so unique. And then the camera became also for me a way of understanding. So not representing, but I was taking the building by part, just slowly in different light, making different association, because yes, by framing we can create this relationship with different part of what we see. And this is very, very strong. You connect a shadow, a diagonal, a little light, you make an inside story. And the camera was a way to discover the reality that was in front of me. I never been a student of architecture. I never been a student of John Hejduk. And when he said that he was teaching by osmosis, I really believe, because he was communicating something amazing that allowed me to become really passionate about space, architecture, and then photography. So the beginning of the book is somehow a small collection of the photograph I've done of his work. He's built very little, made some wonderful books, which I think are very important for students of architecture. And around the world, there are students that in late 80s and beginning of 90s have been building some of his conceptual projects in the front of the school or in a square. And I was lucky to be asked to photograph this quite enigmatic project. This is called Security. It was built in Oslo. This was called the House of the Suicidal, House of the Mother of the Suicidal. It was built here in the US, in Atlanta, and then again in Prague. It has quite complex connection with a poem wrote by David Shapiro, and an event in Prague that the poem was celebrating about the death of a young boy from Prague that decided to burn himself to stay free from the Russian invasion in '68. So it's full of connotation. It's extremely intense, and the space it's quite simple, but in somehow subject and object are embodied in the same. And there's a narrative, but there's also a space, a little house. So that was my first encounter with architectural photography. This is another little project that was built in Philadelphia called Subject Object. And there was a dialogue between two structures, and I decided, normally I don't use much of artificial lights, but in that case, because it was quite of a noisy building, I decided to put some light just to make a stronger dialogue in between the two structures, and take away the background. And somehow, when I look at it now, I'm always amazed by this shadow, because you have a shadow of the staircase going in one direction and the other one going up, so there's two different senses, and I don't know how I did it, but it's still a beautiful, enigmatic picture. And I also got a very beautiful comment by John saying, Hélène, you're managing with your work to go back of some of my early dreams. And this is always what I'm trying to do. You all know how complex it is to make a building, and I hope that every architect and student start with a dream, and then you have to go through many, many stages which are very complex, drawings, intellectual, political, economical, everything. Then you build, then you have the building process, and then when it's built, you might ask somebody to photograph. And in this image, if I can go back to this first gesture, this first dream, I think my task is fulfilled. So that was an extremely beautiful compliment from John. In a chapter of the ruin, here a few photographs of, no, not the ruin, sorry, the memory, the Holocaust Memoria by Eisenman. This is the only project that I photograph of his work. And it has a rather important weight in this chapter, but as a photographer, I was amazed how it was an experience where I could not play very much with my camera. It is an experience where you are asked to walk in a very precise way and to experiment this grid which has been broken, which has been destroyed by the madness, so this order which is gone, and the camera cannot go away from this. So yes, there is my desire to work in some very specific way, and like Mosen said, sometimes to find some very small detail that maybe are not so visible. But I often compare my position with a musician in a score. So there is a score, there is a spirit, and I have to follow that. I'm not an independent artist that completely moves away alone with my own individual interest. I have to follow what is the style. And in that case, I stay very neutral. Not far away, we are in Berlin with this memory chapter. And there is the work of Daniel Libeskind, the Jewish Museum. And I was very lucky to be able to photograph it during constructions. And there is a fascination for construction as a photographer, because I think it's a very raw stage of the building where the main essence of the building, it's there. We don't have doors, fire exits. We don't have anything for the eye to be distracted. We can really play with pure form and light. It was good. That was a very specific and beautiful building in construction. And I was playing with this very strange sensation that my camera, like Mosen said, it's a film camera, it's big, it's plate. I work on 4x5 format, I put my blanket, and it's a box. It's a box that collects light, and the light is going to enter the lens and just touch the surface of the film. And the building in front of me was like a box with opening, and the light was touching the floor of the building and scratching it. So it was almost a dialogue between those two boxes. And that was quite a unique moment. The photograph can become very abstract sometimes, and by chance you have a zigzag of light on the floor and a point and a line, and you make an homage to architecture by having just a point and a line, and but it's still the Jewish Museum. So this quite complex balance between what we can do with the camera and respecting what is a concept of the building. The other building that I choose, it's a series of photographs that I've done 2006 and 2011, and it's in Germany again, and it's the church, the museum that Zumthor built on top of the ruin of a church destroyed by the Second World War. It is a very big museum that one side, yes, protects the ruin, and it has inside a little chapter by Böhm, and then the museum. Here, I just wanted to show the building as a presence in a city, almost as a ghost. It is interesting to think about photography. Some people say photography is a ruin. The moment you make a photograph, you isolate a moment in a particular space that it's not going to be anymore. So the concept of ruin and the concept of photograph is quite tight, it's quite complex. So it is one moment of the life of this building which I managed to capture with a special early light. Then I have 3 photographs of the inside. I just wanted to stop on talking more about light. Of course, it's the most banal subject that photographer can talk about, but it is our tool. That's how we draw, we play with light, we use light. It's our main tool. And it's interesting to think about how we need light to see the space. We see the object, but we need the volume and the object to see the light. So there is this incredible relationship. And we need a volume to have the variation and duration of the light. If not, the light will be not possible to be seen by us. We need maybe the dust or the fog or the humidity or an object. So in that case, I just try to make a very simple study of this very gentle light that comes and gives volume to a beautiful sculpture which is on top of the staircase. Is one of the pieces that in the museum has an organization where some pieces are changing all the time and some pieces are just there always, and this is one of the pieces that will stay part of the main collection. So it's a journey of this very gentle light, and then the light is catched by the room with the excavation, which is a room made quite very big space with bricks, and the light goes through, and some time of the day you can see that flowing into the ceiling. So again, we need the volume to really have this variation. We need that possibility of capturing the light. If not, it will be just completely ephemeral for us. And then in the end, one little bulb, which is the body, it's embodying the light. So the light becomes a sign for the entrance for the church, designed by Böhms, which is inside the building. So it's not anymore a light which touches a wall or enter an opening, but it is an object light. We cannot speak about light without speaking about shadows, and shadows has been always a fascination for photographer and for me. I've been asked to be a curator and also to do 2 essays on shadows by the Museum of Frankfurt in Germany in 2001. And it was quite amazing to be able for a while to just concentrate on the nature of shadows. So this first essay was about an observatory which is in India, in Jaipur. It's called Jantar Mantar. And why did I choose an observatory? I was first photographing the shadow of La Tourette by Le Corbusier in France. You will see those photographs later on. And it was quite an amazing experience, and the complexity of the shadow and the way they orchestrate the space was beautiful. So after that, I decided to go for very, very, very small shadows, which are maybe which are giving us the possibility of connecting with something very big. It's an observatory which is astrological, so and astronomical. So you can, in a very precise way, it was built in 1726. It was a time where it's called Jantar Mantar because Jantar was a moment of somehow Hinduist. Jantar means instrument, and Mantar is a movement of Hinduism. So it's a period where the science is progressing, the Hinduism is very important, and you can measure the sun, you can measure the time, you can measure the eclipse, so it is an instrument. But on the other side, it's also going to tell you maybe the future, so by looking at this small object, you're connected with something extremely big. And you might be able to understand. So if we think about shadows, I like to play with the idea that maybe, in the beginning there was darkness, so every time you're confronted with shadows, you are confronted with something in time and in space very, very big. So it's really allowed us to understand things that sometimes are difficult to grasp. So shadow, it is an absence. It's an absence of energy. And as an absence compared to other absence, like maybe a situation of silence or being cold, it's giving us a lot of information, sometimes misleading, sometimes real information, like in the case of the observatory. And it is also something that has been a lot of interpretation. We have hundreds of anthropologists studying the power of the shadows and how, I also heard some people were studying way of curating people looking at shadow. It's a vast, vast world. But for us, it's also a way to understand the space, and it's a way to articulate our photograph, the volume of our photograph, and we need that to understand the light. So like in silence, in music, you need the silence to have the beginning and the end of a piece, to have the tempo. Everything is given by silence. I think in light and then in photography, everything is given by shadows. So it is a very beautiful phenomenon that we have to all the time try to look and to understand. But the most striking aspect for me was, I go back to this one, that it was very difficult to really frame a shadow. And especially in the next essay about La Tourette, I had a physical almost impossibility to put my camera and say, now I'm photographing a shadow. You are all the time drawn towards the light. And it is the composition at the end is going to say what is the subject of your photograph. But it is a very difficult thing. So here we're going to La Tourette, and I start with a very strong photograph of color. I do photograph color, and in color, not all the time. I think color is one of the moment of a space. It's also by existing color. But also it's a bit of a, through the book, it's a moment to wake up. Sometime in music, you have a very beautiful theme, and the composer puts a very strong percussion, like in a symphony of Haydn. You have a very strong moment of percussion just to wake up the public. So you need a bit of color just to stop, because I don't want to be obscure. I don't want to be dark in the sense of dark, but I love gray, white, and black and white. So we need this color. And here we are now in La Tourette, where I only have few images here, but it was absolutely the most wonderful experience I had in my whole career, was to concentrate it on understanding the building. Of course, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but and how really the shadows was giving a function, helping to have the function of every room and every space. In that case, it's the corridor that brings you to the entrance of the church, and it was this fantastic game in between the floor, which takes you to the entrance of the church, and the window that Xenakis actually designed. He became also a very well-known contemporary composer. And there's this quite articulated rhythm of light, like a music, so it has two movements, the horizontal and the vertical, because the windows are cut into many vertical little parts. And it's full of also disturbing moments. It's not only a grandiose entrance where you go towards the church with the complete belief, because the two corridors are creating light in between each other, so they start to make funny extra part of light. But the interesting part was that I looked at the floor, and then I looked at the window, and the window has, as we can see, and you all know, it's a big window with big opening. But the moment I frame with my camera from the side, and then bit by bit I move in the front, and then I go again, I have the opening become more and more open or close, and this is the same things that happen also on the floor. So I was playing with my camera, creating a movement that was similar to the one that the sun does on the window. I'm sorry. Now I just wanted to talk a little bit about framing. I say it's one of our main tools, but it's also interesting because many architects are also pointing, like Corbusier, that we have to frame reality. It's too overwhelming, it's too complex, so we have to reduce to have this experience. It's also a way to create a window in between two conditions. It's a way of creating your own perspective, your own. It's a moment where you allowed yourself to be in between those two positions and to have your own view. for us, it's about excluding a lot, but somehow it is very important also to think that when you exclude, you still have to have the rest of what you exclude in your photograph. And the moment you frame, you have a format, a lot of format of the way we frame reality since the beginning of the first image have a quite interesting proportions. They are often rectangular and with quite, let's say, proportional. You don't see many frames which are extremely long in a vertical or in a horizontal way. And I like to frame also with square because there's no hierarchy of one side. If you're framing vertical, the vertical becomes very important. And if you're very horizontal, the horizontal and the line, it's always an energy in going to the long side. Square, it's pure, there's no difference. Every size is the same. And the center becomes extremely strong. And you can really describe just a very simple event, like is happening now, just by stopping with this frame. So one of the essays that I did was to photograph, there's a series of about 16 images of this little black square, which is sitting outside in a little balcony of the priest. They are Dominican, so they live this very intense life. They recreate this world inside their monastery, and the only ornament I could find was this little box that capture lights over the different time of the day. So, and at the end it becomes really the black square. So black square, we all love it, and there's many references to black square. So I was happy to finish with this image. Talking about black square, I brought here the work of Raoul Bunschoten, which is also my husband, and a series of detail of texture that from a project that he built in late 80s in Holland, which was a series of big sphere around a fortress in Holland. I love the work, and I love to show this because, again, I think sometimes space, it's allowed us to be in connection and to question very big dimensions that are difficult to understand. So it's also giving a place to the human being in relation to the universe. The same way, I think the little chapel that Bruder Klaus Kapelle that Peter Zumthor built a few years ago in Germany, the same way I think this little very simple structure in the middle of a field is it's giving us, yes, a place to concentrate, to pray as a little shadow in the middle of the field, so you can go there and be just with a bit less light. And when you look up, you can see the sky, so it's just collecting the light. And I step out, I see the field, I see how is it built, all the layering. I'm sure you all know that he had a quite special process, the way he built this with all the involvement of the farmer. And it was a very special client. They were farmers, very simple people, that they decided he was going to be the architect and nobody else, and they insisted until he said yes. But then I wanted to build with this old tradition, and it's in concrete, but it's every day the peasants were pushing down the different layer, and inside it was wood that was burned when it was finished. And it is a private chapel where the farmer goes every day to pray in the morning. So first I looked at it as a little shadow in the middle of a field, then as a way of collecting light. And then when I decided to photograph at night, I had very long exposure. And here we can't see very well because it's a projection and not a print. Then the sky was full of stars, but because we moved, the stars become lines. So that was quite amazing to see that a photograph, again, like the little shadow of Jaipur, can give you the sense of something very big. So we cannot not talk about light, and there's many places where I could do an essay about light. It's a difficult choice, so I had to reduce. It was maybe the chapter that was the harder to do. I was very lucky to go to photograph this new build project of Le Corbusier that was only finished, I think, 5 years ago, and it's called Saint-Pierre in Firminy, and it's a very special space, church, where the new technology of the halls that are built around the altar of the church have I think a technology that at the time he could not imagine, and the way the light penetrated allowed to have this like almost magical effect. Only in one specific season and only at midday for half an hour the church is full of line of light. So it's like a firework. It's very beautiful. Or it's like to see the Nordic light. It's really, you go there and you're amazed and then it disappears. It's finished. So it was a very nice surprise. Then I go back to Columba again, and I go back to this this sensation I was talking about, how we need the volume to understand the light, and the light needs the material to exist. Here, just few images of. I didn't photograph a lot his work, but it's very beautiful work, and I wish I could do more. He's a monk from. He's not alive anymore. From Holland, called Don van der Laan, and he built few monasteries. Absolutely beautiful, and I think all his philosophy of architecture, all the objects, all the things he did are absolutely marvelous. So. I will be never allowed completely to do a book about his work because no woman can get into the monastery, but still I hope something around it in a public space. So that was just a game, how to look at the light. And I think we have somehow we are obsessed with light, and somehow this idea that the light is something that always existed, and maybe if you look at the Bible, it was the beginning of the world, not the darkness, and then there was too much light, and some light was taken away, because in the beginning apparently you could see the whole universe through the whole earth, through it was so bright. So light was taken away, and it will be kept for us for heaven. But since then, since we have less light, since we see less, we are obsessed with making objects which allow to see us light. So I think it's very beautiful to think about the profession of people that make things, that they actually just object to celebrate this light that is given to us. And they are a desire to make the world shine. Just a few photographs of Waltz, again by Peter Zumthor. I photograph all his work. I'm photographing his new work right now. And again, it was difficult to choose. I just wanted to talk about the power of framing, the power of the composition that the camera is allowed to do, to have one point of view. You really can create different volumes, shapes, and sometimes when I work, I almost forget when I have in front of me, I have purely these different forms, and I put them together forgetting if I have a staircase, a chairs, a wall, or a door. They're just becoming form. I love this photograph because I think they really embody this building, which is surrounded by very strong force of nature. It's water, it's mountain, it's light. And he's managing to just make a building that allowed us to feel this very strong element by just controlling how much can come in, how much light, how much water. And it is again about not saying everything. It's about just bringing few aspects to understand the world. We need more silence. We need more reduction to be able to penetrate such a complex world like our world. One more aspect, I photograph a lot in black and white. You see few color, and yes, when I was there, I went to photograph also at night, and the lights were off, and I was sitting. It was night. I could feel the space. I could feel the water, the humidity. Everything is there. There's no light, but everything is there. And then the light was turned on by somebody, and then I had all this color. And I had this feeling, oh, the color exists when the light is on. If not, there's no color. The space is there, but there's no color. So because I really like to look at architecture like a box where things are happening, there's many phenomena. There's the weathering if it's outside. There's the usage. Sometimes there's a patina. Light is just, the color is just one of these phenomena. And it is important. I have to photograph it, but it is not the way of looking at space. It's just one of the moment that you have to describe. And by pushing a little bit the scientific aspect, I try to understand how the eye is seeing the color of black and white. And we see color with the cone, but we see black and white and with the rod. They are the sensor, the receptor in our eye, and there are many, and they are around the periphery of the eyes, and they are the one that give us also security, because we can see very, very quickly and allowed us to maybe protect if something very fast happen. And they are black and white. So in a fraction of a second, and these are giving us the space. First we see black and white, and then we see color. So this is pushing a bit, but I like the idea that there are two moments of seeing, and one is more spatial, because it has to give the awareness of where we are, and it's black and white. Materiality, it's another moment where I decided to, another subject, chapter, title, and I decided to put a few different work together. So here again, Peter Zumthor, the little chapter, the little Kapelle up St. Benedict in the mountain. It was an absolute pleasure to photograph the relation with the landscape, the way the wood is changing with the weathering, the way it touched the ground, the different level, everything is fantastic. The way the light is just barely there and very delicate. But I wanted to say something again, that this very intimate relation between material and what can they do. Photography, it is able to show you that, and black and white in detail a lot. So yes, we are limited, but there are some things which are extremely pleasant and direct, and I think we can tell you a lot what the material is going to do. Maybe with a black and white photograph, you will not know how to select the material and where to find in a catalog if you are a student and want to see what material to use. But you want to see how the material, what is material going to do. I think the black and white are going to be very relevant. So next to Peter Zumthor, Sigurd Lewerentz, and it was nice how the Moisen was reminding me that Peter Zumthor saw this photograph very early on, and then he decided to invite me for his book, so they are historically very important for me because the collaboration with Peter Zumthor was and is a wonderful collaboration. And there are also very, very early photographs. I was asked to make a book about just an essay about one church, the one not Klippam, the one in Stockholm, the San Mark, I think it's called. It's in a bit outside Stockholm, and it was absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's such a direct building. It's such an incredible relation with the nature and with a very specific winter nature. The dialogue in between the skin of the object, the light, and the tree was so clear and so wonderful. In the end, photography, yes, is difficult, but when the building is so poetic, it's just there. You don't have to do anything. And I like to play with pairing photograph. I think that's a very interesting tool when you try to talk about space. I mentioned the book and also the space of the book, and like also Gary was reminding me that I was showing him when I was making a book about Zaha, that when we did the layout with Lars, at one point we only looked at the white of the page and not the photograph anymore. So these are part of the image too, what is around when you create a book, when you create it. It's also space. Pairing is another tool. So if these two images are together, they are different, then they have something similar. It's the composition. So you started to look with your eyes and you have this memory of something white and then something black. And when it stays in your memory, I think it's a very complex perception that somehow, for me, it is space. And then we have the inside with the shivering of the light. Few photographs of Alvar Aalto. This is just the floor of the House of Culture in Helsinki. It's a very, very beautiful floor made with hundreds of tiny little bricks, tiles. And there's a lot of story about this floor because the building was built by the workers that they're gonna have to. This was their building. It was a building for them to go and see a performance or to dance, and this incredible work they had to do was really for them, and this floor really represents that effort of making this beautiful, bitter floor. Here we are in Greece. I photographed this also maybe, I will say, late 89, something like this. And it was a fantastic experience, not to work with space, but landscape it becomes. It's not anymore a building, it's just the ground, it's just the floor, it's just a path. It is about viewing the Acropolis. It is done by Dimitris Pikionis. It's a collage of stone, old stone that he was finding in the landscape or in Athens. It was a period where they were, when it was built, I think it was 59, they were demolishing a lot of houses. And it's like a tapestry that allowed you to view the Acropolis and to connect with this masterpiece, but also to the landscape. Forming. I am more and more interested in photographing nature, and when I photograph nature and landscape, I am interested in seeing if some of the same concept that I have can be applied, and they can definitely do. And in this case, it was an invitation that I had to photograph the landscape for a book. And we were 3 photographers and 3 poets. We worked for a year, and we made each one a big series of images. And the first connection I had was that I cannot think about landscape photo without thinking about a walk. For me, it's like the same to the building, the big view of the mountain, overwhelming, it's very difficult to connect with. I need to walk, and when you walk a mountain, you have the diagonal. This is the stronger element, the simple, it's very simple. You have this diagonal coming again and again to you. So there's a big series of diagonal in an essay. Here everything is a bit reduced in this presentation and in the book, because it is just one book, this essay. So, but also the sense of the light, the new line being born again in the beginning of the spring, when the ground is so rough and hard because it's been almost burned by the cold winter, and then in the spring light is coming new, and the discovering of very strange, almost graffiti that the ice is living in the ground. But also the playing with scale. Something can be very close, like the first image, and the other one is very far or very close, and this ambiguity. I think ambiguity is rather an important element to create a moment of maybe amnesia. When you look, you cannot only look and know. It would be not enough. You have a moment where you say, what do I looking? What is it? I don't know. And then you refer to your own imagination, to your own knowledge, to create something new. Photography, it's so realistic. It's tough to make something out of photography, which is, you bring it to another level, because you don't want to see the reality of every day. You want to see something else. And that's, I think it's given by this silence. So in this endless scale of the mountain and in Switzerland and the landscape, I decided to have the work of Zaha Hadid. And I've been involved a lot in working side. She likes my work. I'm not the only photographer, and I think it's good. She always say I like to see my building from very different point of view, and I think that's a quite interesting argument for an architect to not have one. Every architect reacts in a very different way. Some architect wants to have their photographer, their point of view, their control, their publisher, their paper for the books, everything. And others, they let it go and they say, I want it to be seen in a very different way. But she loves the photograph I do on the working side, and I'm always quite fascinated by her interest, try to understand also what it is. Of course, she builds a lot in concrete, so maybe now less, but this is a very fascinating process where the process is beautiful and the building is almost like a skeleton. It's like the childhood of a building. It's so rough, but so much there in its pure function. So it is a very big challenge for me to do that over the years. And also, I think it allows. She said very gracefully once that some of my photographs were also a point to start something new. So we have the dream of Hejduk, and then you have this new project that can be born out of a unknown detail, maybe that I photographed. And also, maybe there's something in her work that is changing, and to go back sometimes to the real rough aspect of the building side is for her a way to connect with some of her maybe more inner creative moment. There's a quotation she wrote about photography, which it was not for my work, but the work of Lucien Hervé, which definitely have been a mentor for me. And she says, space is the fluid counterpoint to dense materiality. There is something endless in space within which fragment a place. And this fragment are photographs. So I thought that was a very beautiful way to talk about this fluidity and to talk about the presence of an image that at one point can just allow you to feel the continuity. There's a museum in Glasgow, Transport Museum. again, I was able to go on the roof and to photograph this beautiful landscape, but that's made by her, not by nature. And then these are well-known images. Over the years, I photographed her work also at night sometime to isolate some of her form and to create this kind of family portrait, let's say, of her project. So by the end, I hope I'll have like 10 beautiful family portrait of all her buildings. So you take it away, the context, you play with the light and with the darkroom, and you have these images. This is one other family portrait. It's Museo Maxi in Rome. The ground, very important, as a subject, is a completely different way of creating a narrative when you don't have the horizon, and the perspective is different. So I'm always fascinated about any project where I have to make a study of the ground. This is Geoffrey Bawa and his beautiful garden in Sri Lanka that he somehow built and changed all over his life. I was very lucky to photograph her, and he was still alive. It was a completely different world for me. It wasn't the pure nature of Switzerland, where things are happening because of the cold, the winter, the snow, the rocks, the formation of the earth, but because of his vision. And every day he was going there quite paralyzed and talking with his gardener, and with one hand he could just move a little bit and ask to change something, and they could make an interpretation of his hand, and there will be a bush change, a tree slightly trimmed, and a new plant coming. So this garden had a full evolution of all his life. It changed with him. So he was growing and with his life. Like I say, I'm fascinated by photographing landscape and also the way the landscape is made. In that case, there were stones in an island in Stockholm. There's a big archipelago there where you have this beautiful island, and there's fantastic rocks. These rocks have been shaped during the ice, when it was the ice cap and the ice time, and the ice was cracking the earth. So sediment, the ice was somehow cracking, making force on the, and then sediment could go into the ice and also influencing the cracks of the rocks, and that's what we see. And they make very, very specific way of opening the rocks. But then at the same time, I was in the mountains in Switzerland, like somehow it is the same, but many, many years later. So it is about building the earth. It is the way the world has been built, is the cracking, and over time it's millions of years of difference. But this is the effect of what the ice is doing now. It was top of a glacier, so I had a blackout. And here's the glaciers, with incredible, powerful presence, which also we cherish so much because we know they are melting so quickly. And the sense of vastness, and to be in the middle of the, almost like in the moon, surrounded by rocks and water. So this is the end of my book, and it's not the end of the lecture. I wanted to show you a few more work, a little bit on the city, a little bit about the most recent work that I'm doing now. I wanted to point that all this work, and I'm still doing now, it's done on film. I'm really an advocate on film. I think photography is somehow celebrating the instant in a quite irregular. You can't change that moment. That's how photography is born. It's about one instant. There's nothing wrong, like Wolfgang Tillman, the German photographer, said about the light touching the sensor. I have difficulty, and he has it too, about Photoshop. and the banalization that this tool is giving us, where we can reach very, very easy some very beautiful, seductive results. But I'm more interested in limitation, so hard work, heavy camera, film, expensive. Shooting is like a performance. It's very hard. You are there for the limited amount of time and film, and you have to give your best then. And nothing much can be changed after. And I believe the results are different. So I really want the young student to think about and to reconsider how they photograph. You can photograph with digital, but you need a very big discipline. And there's no 1,000 photographs in the end of the day. There are 3, there are 4. And you connect with the reality in a very different way. I think this connection is lost. You're there in front of this amazing performance of life, of things happening, of change. And you have to say yes, only yes. That's what we do. And this yes has to be a complete commitment that that's what you are ready to do. So we have a small series of photographs here. It's wonderful that I can give a lecture, but you can also see print, because I'm also so much believe in the art of printing, in the relation between the mind and the hand, and that we can somehow have this craft of making something. So you will be able to see my prints. I mostly photograph building, but somehow while I was photographing building, city came around me. They were the place where the buildings are born, like the origin of many buildings is the city. So the city was there, was around me. In that case, I was trying to understand the relation between the grid, it's in Lecce, it's in Italy, the grid of the city, which is Roman, and then you have the Baroque city sneaking out. So there were points where they could meet or not. So like the first photograph, you really see this corner entering 2 different dimensions. So I went up to see if I could see more, but then there was this beautiful landscape of building and also television antenna. It was done quite a few years ago, so there's no satellite. That's the first thing I notice now is no satellite. But then something completely rational, the old city, it's covered by these stairs that are, I don't know, some people said there was a way of communicating. People would stand on the stair and call each other. But there's this very, very, very irrational part of architecture that I thought is wonderful. It's a stair going to the sky, and it's beautiful. Then Palermo, few images of this fantastic city, which I visit many times. I never done very much a study, but maybe one day. And it was a fantastic time again, where the city was almost been born again. The mayor was very active, Luca Orlando. He was trying to open the opera, open many culture plays, and fight the mafia and give a new identity. And I hope this photograph can celebrate that moment of hope that the city had. Then again, we are in the late 80s, so I photographed the work of John Hejduk, and of course Berlin was there. It was still a Berlin closed by the wall, divided. And now when I look at them, they are so much. I mean, they are the 80s. They cannot be anything else. So it's incredible how you can, with very few elements, it's like the vendors. You feel that atmosphere of a very still time, but very intense. Also architecturally, quite strong and pure. Then, by looking from the balloon that is there for the tourist, I could photograph this. This is not about being born, but it's about the memorial. So it is like a wound in the city. And I thought that view was also very strong. And then the rest up here. It's this construction. So what is going to be, I think, it became the American embassy. So it is a continual process of looking at the city. Again, why this photograph now? We are at the Tower Bridge. This photograph nowadays would be impossible. There's a huge Renzo Piano building to almost finished. It's going to be one of the highest towers I think, Europe. And everything become historical. Yes, photograph is like a ruin. You photograph a moment, and then that's unique. So I was trying to locate this piece that Eric Parry did there. It's just like a little arrow to be able to orient yourself in between two areas. They're quite interesting, because other work is very rough area. Now it's changing, and then you have the bridge, and you enter the city, and so it's the joining of these two parts of the city. The Volso museum built by Caruso St John, I work a lot for them. There's not a lot in this selection today, but actually I should have a little bit more of their work. I'm very fan of what they do, and we had a beautiful collaboration. And one photo is just the hall where the building is going to be built in this quite sad outskirt of, we are next to Birmingham, so it's the middle of England, and you see these warehouses and industrial area, they are completely desolated, they are empty, there's no industry, there's nothing happening there anymore. So the building was a bit of a desire to revive the place. And more I was struggling with photographing big dimension and try to understand, because when I photograph space, my tool is framing. My tool is really composing every part of the image. And it's much harder when you are looking at the skies, somehow a view from the high, from a very high point of view. And then I thought, what can we do as photographer? And I think scale, it's our tool now, playing with scales and showing how you can show a very large part of the city and then a very small one, and play with these two elements because where the city stops, there's no way I can say that the entrance of the museum by Zaha Hadid is not the city, and the city is also the skies. It's everything. So playing with these two extremes scale is very important, I think, to give the complexity of a city. This is a construction of the Maxi, so it's Rome. You can still see a little bit of the cupola, very far away, and around it's a different Rome. It's maybe a more Rome from Pasolini, but still, for me, very dear. I grew up there, and it was fascinating to see the building growing. I went back when it was finished, and you can still see the cupola from that window, which was very important for the lady that the building hasn't taken away from her. So St. Peter cupola is still there. You could see, even finished project. This is Istanbul, and it's taken from a high building. It's really high, and the top, not from an airplane or an helicopter. It's taken from a building. And the reason I did this photograph, it was for me I thought it was so beautiful, the way you feel how the land is somehow gently going toward the sea. Everything in this city, it's very dense and very beautiful, but if you look at the small scale, everything is also going to the sea. And you see at the end the water, the amazing condition of being in between this very specific part of the sea which is separating two worlds. So that's why I decided to do this photograph. And the big, beautiful part of Istanbul, it's barely visible. It's really at the corner top. It's the old Istanbul. But that's also Istanbul. Istanbul is changing and growing, and it's been built very rapidly. Holland, Leiden, flat landscape, where Zumthor is going to renovate this old factory. This is Baku, completely, absolutely crazy city, where Zara is building a new museum. So it's a view of the site, and I was fascinated to discover that the site is not enormous. It's like containing a little city, which is the city where the workers. And I mean, you can see it from yourself. It's a very interesting scale. To photograph of Mumbai. So again, I was fascinated by the transport system, the road, and especially the railway. The railway is taking into Mumbai 7 million people every day. It's the whole population of Switzerland, in and out every day. So the way of looking at the city, it was for me to give this sense of the infrastructure, and also it's growing very rapidly, but still you have very well-known part of the city which keep this tradition of washing the clothes. It's in Montpellier, and it's a center for an archival and a center for just administration of different parts of the, I think, sport institution. So it's very practical, it's very strong building, graphically very strong again, like we haven't seen it here, but it is all this work that she did with the terminal for tram and the parking in Strasbourg, in France too. So I was fascinated by this relation between the graphical aspect, but also the volumes that she's showing. When you go closer, you see that the articulation is quite complex. And then new architect that I'm somehow my new, not a discovery but new relationship is the Studio Mumbai. They are based in Mumbai and in a jungle. They have a very specific way of working, and that's why I show this workshop in the middle of the forest where they live and work. They work with a lot of craft people that Bijoy Jan, the architect, is somehow finding. They are specialists on stone, on limestone, on concrete, on wood, and they have this by tradition. And he works with them and also try to develop the space in relation to this craft that they know so well. So that's why I also present this photograph, which is celebrating the making, which I think is very beautiful. And one piece of the work, Palmyra House, which is sitting next to the water. Very, very beautiful piece of architecture. Zumthor is built quite incredible memorial to the witches in north of Norway, top north. Somehow a group of women asked him to create this building because there has never been a memorial for witches. Many women were accused to be witches, sometimes for very well reason, with not much of a trial, and they asked Louis Bourgeois and him to make this piece. So again, in a place of the world where the light is so strange, where there was no night, where there was this sense of memory and this sense of endless, I photographed the building somehow in a very simple way to bring this idea of being a bit suspended in time. And I wanted to finish with this very beautiful celebration of architecture and landscape together. It was the Serpentine Pavilion that again, Peter Zumthor built with an incredible garden designed by Pete Odorf. And I like to finish with this image of this garden, which is completely overwhelming us, especially this young lady looking, and the power of nature that sometimes we try to control, to understand, and but sometimes it's even too much. And this is what I want to do with my camera. It's to enjoy, to understand, and to celebrate life. And I think that's what photography can do. Thank you very much.